2 days ago, Macron spoke on the phone to Putin. Now, that doesn't sound like a very big event, except that they haven't spoken for the last 2.5 years. This is the first breach in the informal understanding among European leaders that they won't talk to Putin for as long as the invasion continues.
The Trump administration says it's pausing some weapons deliveries to Ukraine in a move that could leave Kyiv defenseless against Russian ballistic missile attacks. Meanwhile, in lifting sanctions against Syria, Washington seems to have inadvertently lifted some restrictions against Russian companies. So, as Ukraine peace talks stall, is this further evidence that Trump is going soft on Putin? Well, Sir Tony Brenton is a former British ambassador to Russia, and he joins us now. Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you help us unpick what's going on here? What exactly has happened, and how concerned should we be about it?
Well, it looks as if the Americans are toughening up their approach to Ukraine as a way of getting the negotiations moving faster than they are at the moment. I agree with what you just said, that the inadvertent cutting off of some sanctions on Russia does feel very accidental. If you look at the list of people who've been taken off the sanctions list, it includes one vast Russian company, Rosoboronexport, and also some rather random oligarchs, including a man whom I know, Lyubimov, who's basically a chess champion. So that feels accidental, but it does demonstrate or fit with the general feeling in Washington that sanctions don't work. We have other serious business we want to do with Russia. Therefore, we shouldn't be in the business of what is natural in the current situation in negotiations, pressurizing the Russians to do more. So what do? We find ways of adding to pressure on Ukraine to make some concessions. And the obvious area to do that in is actually in limiting arms exports. And that seems to be precisely what's happening. They haven't said that it's the cause. On the contrary, Trump last week said that he recognized that Russia is the principal obstacle to progress. Nevertheless, given that they want movement, this is probably one of the few things that they can do.
So to put it plainly, what you seem to be suggesting there is that this is a policy by Donald Trump to end the war, essentially by making it unsustainable for Ukraine to keep fighting. I mean, that's a very risky policy to pursue, isn't it?
Well, it is risky in the sense that the Ukrainians are very slowly losing the war, and this could accelerate the pace at which they lose. And of course, if they completely collapse, then independent Ukraine, in effect, ceases to exist. And I don't think that's a result that Trump wants. But equally, he does want some progress on bringing the war to an end, not least because he's got other business to do with Russia. So in the absence of anything else, this seems to be the approach they're taking. If they can nudge the Ukrainians without bringing about a huge military collapse into offering a few more concessions in the negotiations, then that may be the way forward.
But as you've indicated, it's not just about the Ukrainians, is it? It's also about President Putin on the Russian side. Have you seen any indications, and you obviously watch this very closely, that President Putin is in any way committed to a ceasefire, any kind of sustainable ceasefire or peace deal here?
No, it's fair to say there is no objective evidence that he is. But the Americans are convinced, and I think they're probably right, that actually Putin has gotten himself into a disastrous war. And he would be delighted to find a way out which is face-saving and which he can present to his people as a victory. At the moment, he's massively overbidding, demanding massive reductions in the Ukrainian armed forces, for example, as part of the deal. And when we get to proper negotiations, the hope is that he will actually move to a more sensible position. But it's true that so far he's shown no sign of doing that.
What do you think the reaction from the other allies, Ukraine's other allies around the world will be? Because the UK government, the EU powers have all made it very clear that they are committed to Ukraine. That commitment will continue. There's also been a lot of pressure put on Donald Trump, including during the NATO summit, where the communique was slightly watered down to make it easier for the Americans to sign up to it. What do you expect will be the reaction from the UK and EU side to this?
Well, you're right. The Europe, in what it says, and to some extent in what it does, has maintained a very staunch position on all of this. But it has also offered to find security arrangements for Ukraine in the event of an eventual peace deal. So it's doing what it can to help the process forward. It has to be said that the Americans don't take Europe very seriously in all of this. They see themselves as the principal interlocutors and peacemakers. And it's also worth noting that 2 days ago, Macron spoke on the phone to Putin. Now, that doesn't sound like a very big event, except that they haven't spoken for the last 2.5 years. This is the first breach in the informal understanding among European leaders that they won't talk to Putin for as long as the invasion continues. And it's a sign of a growing awareness in Europe as well that Ukraine is going to have to deal in order for us to get to peace.
Yes, it's a really good point, that phone call. Sir Tony, thank you for joining us on the programme this morning.
Thank you.
Sir Tony Brenton, a former British ambassador to Russia.
What's critical there is that it reveals something that we all kind of know, but it really demonstrates it, that Trump regards the war as a neutral thing.
Yes.
So if you think you want the war to end, of course you stop arming Ukraine more, because if you build up Ukraine's army up too much, it will be able to carry on the war.
It will keep the war going.
But every other American leader would have said, we want to keep the Ukrainian army supplied so they can have a peace that suits them, that suits the rest of the world, because Russia is the aggressor. And of course, he doesn't think that. And we've got to keep that in our minds at all times. He regards the war as a neutral thing on both sides, and he wants it to end.
Well, the other thing that Sir Tony was saying there is no sign that President Putin is willing to do any kind of sustainable deal or ceasefire here. And so the logic, while you could try and apply the logic, you could end the war by stopping the supply of weaponry. If Putin isn't going to stop, it just means that Ukraine will be unable to defend itself.
The Pentagon has halted some shipments of air defence missiles to Ukraine. Sources familiar with the decision said on Tuesday. Other precision munitions are also affected, prompted by concerns that US stockpiles are too low. The sources said it amounts to the slowing of some weapons shipments promised to Kyiv by former President Joe Biden's administration. Air defence interceptors to help knock down Russian drones and projectiles were said to be among the items delayed. In recent weeks, Russia has intensified air attacks on Ukraine's cities, on several nights, launching hundreds of drones and missiles at a time, leading to widespread damage and an increase in civilian casualties. Fedor Venislavsky, a member of the Ukrainian Parliament's National Security and Defence Committee, called the decision painful, though he was hopeful of a resolution.
This decision is certainly very unpleasant for us. It's painful, and against the background of the terrorist attacks which Russia commits against Ukraine, against peaceful towns, cities, villages, citizens of Ukraine that die almost every day from such terrorist attacks.
In Kyiv, people on the street met the news with resignation.
It's the choice of the US, so be it. This cannot be a reason for us to let our hands down and not continue fighting until the end.
Since US President Donald Trump took office in January, he has softened Washington's position toward Russia. He has sought a diplomatic solution to the war in Ukraine and raised doubts about future US military support for Kyiv's war effort. Ukraine is already experiencing a shortage of 155mm ammunition used for artillery on the front lines, said one Ukrainian defense source. However, last week, Trump said he was considering selling more Patriot air defense missiles to Ukraine, following a meeting with his Ukrainian counterpart, President Volodymyr Zelensky. Russia, which already controls about a fifth of Ukraine, has been preparing a summer ground offensive, advancing gradually in parts of the east and northeast. In an email, the Pentagon said it was providing Trump with options to continue military aid to Ukraine, in line with the goal of ending Russia's war there, but no new policy has been announced.